but this is the happiest,
Mm.
like, fulfilled dream ever. It's a little different from, like, oh, I want to grow up to be an engineer, or like I had these ideas of like what I wanted to be when I was in high school. There's some ideas about, like, even when I went to engineering school, I was like, oh, maybe I'll be an engineer. Or when I went to design school, maybe I'll be this, like, famous, like, product designer. Maybe I'll work at Apple, maybe. And it's like, then you put in like over a decade of work in corporate, and then you just get back. I finally get back after all these years into something so simple.
Mm.
And then I realized that I'm just doing something that I wanted to do when I was in third grade.
Hard work, that's what they say. Hard work, I earn my pay. Hard work, do it every day.
Welcome once again to another Work Ethic podcast. And I'm sitting here today with David Hugh. I've been really excited to connect with David. David is the artist behind Max the Miata, who many of you may be familiar with if you're kind of in the, let's say, the VFriends universe and paying attention there. If you're not, I'm super excited to introduce you to both him as well as kind of the character that he's developed and kind of this presence he has kind of online. And anyway, I'm gonna just toss it to you, David. I'm excited to meet you. Introduce yourself a bit more to me, to listeners, and then we'll just kind of roll from there.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here on your show. And thank you for the very nice intro. My name is David Hu. I'm a NFT artist as of May of 2021. So this is all very new to me. I'm very lucky to have been in the VFriends community. VFriends is the first NFT project I jumped on because of Gary Vee, and I follow Gary Vee for a few years, and it has been a tremendous blessing for me because NFT has allowed me to jump back into a personal passion that I actually have not revisited since I was a kid. So, I'm sure we're going to cover some of that as I share my story, but it's just been a real blessing for me. And I appreciate being here and telling my story.
Yeah, man. So I want to hear about that. Actually, let's go to you as a kid a little bit. So I want to hear about that passion, but then let's do this. Let's stick kind of to the theme of the show here a little bit to begin. So, like, work as such, as a word, as a concept, when it took on meaning in your life, I want you to go as far back as you can remember. And like, how
Hmm.
did the concept itself take on shape to you? What are your earliest memories or things you remember working on or learning what that even was?
Well, so I was born in the States, in South Carolina,
Hmm.
actually, and back in '81. And my parents had come to the U.S. For grad school from Taiwan, so they're from Taiwan,
Hmm.
and they didn't plan on staying forever. So by the time they were finished with school, and I think I was maybe 3 or 4, they actually brought me back to Taiwan. But that would be the first time I visited Taiwan. And so
You were
when I
how
grew
old at that point?
three or four,
Okay. All right.
3 or 4, I don't really remember, but so when I went back to Taiwan, I think I had just gone to like preschool. I had only gone to preschool in South Carolina. And when I went to Taiwan, I spent the next few years, 4 or 5 years, basically in the more traditional Chinese kind of educational institution, which is more rote learning. So part of it is necessary because you have to memorize like the language, the characters. It's not Roman letters, alphabets. So they're character based language. So there's a lot of rote memory. And so when it comes to work, it was just like memorize, practice a word over and over and over again. Like literally learn a character and then write it 20 times. And that was the homework. Like you had to write maybe like 20 characters 20 times each. And then like that's how you memorize. You start
Wow.
to piecemeal together sentences and words and phrases and things like that. And then of course, when it comes to math is also very rote learning. So I was in my earliest, I would say my earliest like ideas of what it meant to learn and work was listen to what the teacher said and then repeat it. And then you go home, you repeat it. You repeat it, repeat it, repeat it until you're good at it. So I came from that kind of like, I was brought up, and it was like kind of like the earliest formative years of my life, from kindergarten all the way to third grade, which is when my parents decided to bring me back to the US, but this time to New Jersey, because one of my aunts already lived in New Jersey. And so, like, just have relatives in here is always helpful to get settled. So I came back with my family. It's in 1989, the end of 1989. And it was very different. I had not learned how to speak English at the time. I basically had to learn in third grade, and we came in the middle of third grade. So we came at the end of the 1989. So I was coming in halfway into third grade, and I had to take English as second language classes. I had to learn the English language starting from the alphabet, learning, like, I didn't even know A to Z at the time. And so that was very difficult for me. And this idea of, maybe not as much in third grade, but this idea of like having an opinion on something, not being told what the answer is and memorizing that answer, I think is very, very different for me. And socially is very different. So I think work for me, it was almost like a blank slate at the time, because I didn't know what to do. So the only thing I do remember being able to do, even though I didn't speak any language, was when they gave us math homework. So the math homework I went right through, because at that time, even in third grade in the States, my math level from Taiwan was already well into middle school. So that's just the way arithmetic was taught in Taiwan. It's very, stringent and very fast paced. So that was my saving grace. Math homework, and then nothing on the English side, nothing on social studies or anything like that. Anything that had to do with language was a very, very big struggle, even carrying that into middle school. And so I think language was always a bit of a barrier for me. I think mentally, emotionally, it was always a barrier. It was something that it was very difficult for me to wrap my mind around. And but at the same time, math was this thing that was, again, a saving grace, because if I didn't have math to fall back on as this thing where I could say, at least I was good at math.
I'm
I
not
don't know.
dumb.
I don't know how.
Yeah.
I don't know how I would have gone through school, to be honest. And then I think, this goes back to where I'm trying to like understand what school is, social life is, making friends is. Another thing is, like, in Taiwan, we all wore uniforms to school. And so coming here, suddenly you have to wear your own clothes. It was very, very different. It was very strange. And I think that all those like outside social factors, this idea of like coming into like a new but old country at the same time, totally different environment, totally new language. I think that all kind of feeds into this idea of like what work is. And to be honest, I didn't know. So it was just kind of like struggling. Um, so yeah, and I think, but that's in retrospect, that's when I started diving into art a lot, because I didn't have a lot of friends. Anytime I was home, I was just like drawing, and like even in summer, um, I didn't get a chance to go to summer camp in the first few years or anything like that, because it was just very difficult for me to like interact with other kids. So I spent a lot of time just drawing as a kid. So, yeah.
So I grew up drawing. I was an artist my entire life. Although I never do anything now. And it bothers me. Like it's like a I mean, I went to college for art. I did a graphic art degree even at one point, and but that I just got busy with other stuff, and didn't continue it. And maybe that gets picked up again at some point. But like at this point, I treat it like a utility. Like, yeah, I'm like a copy machine. Like, oh, you need that? I could draw that. I could render it, whatever.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but like the creative part of me has been maybe applied to other expressions, is actually the way I think a lot of my work is creative in another way. But like having that familiarity kind of growing up drawing, I'm curious, because it makes sense. You're like, well, I came in, I have all these challenges. Like, with language and environment. There's this kind of new culture, new world, new everything. Luckily I could still do some math, and it's like, it's interesting to see like math and art as like a, those, like, for a lot of folks that are good at art aren't maybe so good at math all the time, right? Like, but it's kind of
Right.
have that overlap, and then you go, well, there was a bit of a blank slate. Blank slate itself is a term that is like, that's either the most horrifying or appealing thing in the world to an artist, to look at a blank canvas and go, all right, create, do
Right.
something. And so just, I don't know, it's very interesting to me to hear at this, like, this early phase, you go, like, the kind of creative journey begins. Partly I'm on my own, don't have a lot of friends, don't speak the language, but like, I don't know, talk to me a little bit about the like the early blossoming of that passion, I guess, or that skill and
Yeah,
interest.
I think I would say art is probably a safe space
Mm,
in the most child like uh context, right? So
mm,
my parents worked a lot, so my grandma at the time was at home and taking care of me. So anytime I came home from school, it was just basically me and my grandma and my younger brother.
mhm,
Um, and so like I really dove into art, drawing, specifically comic art, because um, earlier in Taiwan, I was really into like the Japanese influences that Taiwan was afforded, like a lot of the Doraemon manga, the robot, the kaiju types. I didn't actually get into the kaiju, which is the monster stuff,
mhm,
but I got really into the robots.
hmm,
And when I came to the States, suddenly I didn't get those things. I didn't get Doraemon. I didn't get the robots because those comics weren't like available.
hmm,
And so when I came, it was at the tail end, 1989.
mhm,
It was at the beginning when Ninja Turtles was at like a feverish pitch,
mm,
right? That was huge. When I was a kid, I knew about Spider-Man, so like suddenly I have access to Spider-Man. So those two things were my absolute favorites. And so when I drew, I literally took whatever. If my mom was, willing to get me an issue of Spider-Man comics, I would read that, over and over again. And if I drew, I literally copied pages from the comic book. Same with Ninja Turtles. And that's what I did. I basically dove into that. And I also dove into, luckily again, when my parents weren't home because they were working late at office jobs. Um, luckily I got to watch a lot of cartoon on my own. So I watched a lot of Bugs Bunny, Looney Tunes, a lot of the Disney Afternoon, DuckTales, Tailspin, all those things.
you were
And
born in 81, right?
yeah,
So I'm 1980, because I'm like, oh, me, like, we're at the exact, I'm like, we were watching the same. Yeah. Okay,
right.
keep going, but I'm like exact same.
But the funny thing is, I missed all of the '80s. Don't forget, because when I left the U.S., it was 1980,
Yes, this is
maybe 84,
89 now. Yeah. Hmm.
right? And then I came back in '89, so I missed like pop culture stuff. I missed a lot of the '80s stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I missed a lot of the tail end of anything that was Star Wars. I didn't catch. I
Mm,
didn't catch a lot of the Transformers. I didn't catch GI Joe. So when I came,
mm,
it was very end of '89. It was really just like early '90s, right? So everything that I got, kind of exposed to was early MTV,
mm-hmm.
comic books, Ninja Turtles, Disney animation was exploding,
Yep.
movies and cartoons. And then I watched a lot of like TB. I think we had cable, maybe, or maybe it wasn't cable. I can't remember. But there were a lot of reruns of the old Warner Brothers of cartoons.
Yeah.
So it's really funny
So
because,
good.
and maybe we'll talk about this later. But um, I've been doing a lot of like POAPs,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a lot of DMs with like people in my community, and they're talking about like, oh, I love these cartoons, because one of the questions I asked to like claim a POAP is like, what's your favorite cartoon?
Mm-hmm.
And I swear there have been like, I asked like 100 people because there are 100 links, and the answers span from like 1940s cartoons
Hmm.
all the way to the most recent like SpongeBob, Simpsons. Simpsons has been around for 20 years, but like,
Yeah.
recent stuff. And
Yep.
I'm like, I know almost every single cartoon because I watched so much of it. And again, I'll say the word like saving grace a lot, because in retrospect, there's so many things that just helped me make it through. And I would say cartoons is a huge thing because, again, it was very difficult for me to learn the language. And when, as a kid, when you don't understand something in class, you don't just go like, oh, I'm so interested in learning. How can I learn some more? It's like, if I don't get it, I'm tuning out. But cartoons and comic books help me learn the language. If I didn't understand something when I was reading a Spider-Man comic, that was like my motivation to take out a dictionary and literally translate every single word that I read until I understood what the story was. You throw me like a novel when I was in middle school, or in elementary school. I don't, I didn't have the motivation to do that. So that's how I learned. I learned through cartoons, listening, hearing conversation, and I learned through reading comics.
So one thing that jumps out, I'll just like pick at this a little bit, because like it's true with language, and then it's true. So when you were talking about like, because I did the same thing right now with comic books, like I drew every single cover of the comic books, because I was like, the cover art and the inside art are not even comparable in most of these. So I was like really into cover art, and would draw like it. So there's a thing about imitation, right? Where it's like,
right,
you're going to find your style by drawing and imitating other styles. And then in language, we mimic kind of the voices that we hear, and we learn the language. So this could be, it could be, I learned it from Bugs Bunny or mom and dad or grandma or whatever. Right. And I think a lot of folks in their vocation, because I think this is true of this is how humans develop, period. So whether you're learning a dance or whatever, like you can watch young people mimic the people around them until they kind of find their own voice or find their own style or whatever. But I think in a lot of vocations, people are shy about acknowledging that, or even feel inauthentic because they sound like somebody else, or it's like, oh, you're trying to be like that person. But it's like, well, that's also a way to develop and grow. I'd just be curious to hear, because you have such a clear example. I think art, and then kind of the culture change and language challenges. It's just such an obvious place for kind of the role of imitation. I just be curious to hear you riff on that a little bit.
I would say I probably have never had a huge hang up about imitation, because I had to. Like, if I didn't imitate, I don't know how I would have learned. Right. So, and I would say, like, when I was a kid, I used to get bullied a lot, or I get teased a lot, because they, I remember very early on, the kids in my elementary school would tell me to, spell like a curse word, and then tell me to pronounce it, and then tell on me for saying that word. Right. And so, and I was like, oh, okay, well, I just got in trouble for saying something back. Right. And so, so there's like the pros and cons to that. But, in terms of artistic style, I think it was just, I loved it so much that I didn't really have an issue with it. Right. So I love certain artists that, who drew Spider-Man, for example. I love the particular art style of the original Ninja Turtle cartoon. And I would say those, again, I think maybe some of it, I didn't get exposed to any of that, maybe bias or judgment in terms of art, probably because I wasn't in the comic community either. I'm not saying anything negative about the comic community, but I literally had no friends who did the same thing as I did, because when I read Spider-Man comics, I read Spider-Man comics on my own. Yeah. Like, I didn't bring it to school. Yep. Because I was precious about it. And, if I watched cartoons, I was just sitting in front of the TV with my brother. Like, that's it, And so I wasn't within groups of people who were interested in the same thing and judged for that. Now, I was certainly judged for imitating other things, when I was a kid, mainly in terms of like fashion, for
style.
Example. So
when of course,
right,
all of
so
us,
when
right?
I came, yeah, but I mean, that was horrible. Like, because when I'll say this, just one anecdote on the side. when I came from Taiwan to Jersey, the prevailing, I wouldn't even say fashion, because in the third grader, who's got a fashion sense, right? It was
Mhm.
literally uniform in school. But outside of school, the usual getup of an elementary school kid is short shorts and polo, short sleeve polo shirts tucked into short shorts
Mhm.
and knee-high socks with white sneakers. In some realms that are like really cool right now, but back then, trust me, in
The Bobos.
1989, that was not cool. That was not cool. And so when we came, we didn't have a lot of money. And so anytime I outgrew my clothes, my parents took me to like literally Kmart, like
Mhm.
the cheapest sections to pick out stuff. And kids in school would always tease me for like the kind of clothes I wore, the sneakers I wore. And so, God, like this is almost like super fresh in my mind. So my parents didn't buy me new socks because we had so many like socks that we had to buy for school. So when we first came, all I had were knee-high socks. At the time, that was not cool. So like socks needed to be low.
Yeah.
So what I thought in my own third grader mind, I thought it was cool to be cool. I had to lower them. And the
Mhm.
way to lower knee-high socks is roll it down from the top edge.
Roll
So I got, yes,
like a
roll them
donut
down.
around.
Yes, I had donuts around my ankles, and it was the worst. Like people teased me, but I didn't know any better, right? And I
Yeah.
had like the white sneakers that they like literally people wear in hospitals, right? Like the white sneakers. And whereas everybody else was like into the Reebok pumps,
The pumps.
the earliest like Jordans, if the kids could like afford it, whatever. And it was, but again, I think in retrospect, all the teasing, all the social like pressures drove me to be, isolated in some bad ways, but isolated in some good ways, because I really, really just dove into that part of my life where comics were awesome, cartoons were
Mhm.
awesome, and I just really, really absorbed them. And I had like no bias about like, oh, this is an old cartoon, I don't want to watch old cartoon. I watched every cartoon. If it was hand animate, like 2D anime, there was no 3D animation at the time. If there was animation happening on the screen, I was watching it.
Mhm.
I didn't care.
Now,
So
did you do any animation?
no,
So I
no,
I
I
I tried like flip books and stuff like that, and like early on was getting like Flash and trying to figure out how to do it. And I was like, because in my mind I was like, yeah, you just go be an animator. But I never got that deep. So you didn't either there.
well, I read up on it. So I
Mhm.
remember I had a big hard cover book about like the history of like Looney Tunes and Bugs Bunny, and it was a big orange cover book.
I
Do you
was
have
just
it?
I don't know where they are. I have a bunch of big
Well,
old
anyway,
cartoon books. Yeah, go on.
yeah. So I would read through and then I go, wow, this is what animators do. They have to do every single like scene and
The
slides and
cell,
things like
yeah.
that just to like have Bugs Bunny walk or jump and run.
Oh, the old school
And
ones
I'm
are
like, oh my goodness,
unbelievable.
like this is, yeah, it was crazy. So I remember very early on, like really studying why these movements
Mhm.
show move, like a certain pose shows movement or speed, like speed lines, or
Yep.
like the way Bugs Bunny's ears go back when he's running, or the way like the fists are when they're like high
Yep.
up. So I have very strong memories of these key poses to convey motion, but then also remember animation was just so much work that I just like, there's no way that's for me. I don't have the patience for it.
That
So
makes a
I
lot of
drew a lot of
sense.
poses. I drew a lot of poses, but I never got into animation.
Well, and a lot of your work does imply motion well. It like really does. Now, okay, so here's a cool like for us to kind of jump from the 89 years to today a little bit. I want to use this mechanism. Maybe it'll help us back into some of these other things that you have going on. So I yesterday or not that long ago tweeted 1989 I wrote Toy Maker for what I want to do when I grow up. 2021 dream come true.
Right.
Tell everybody about how that like what you did and how that came true.
So in 1989, again, like that's when I came to States, and I remember very clearly this like homework, or not like it wasn't it was an in-class assignment, and it was your favorite. Who do you want to be when you grow up?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very simple like sentence, and I think maybe the teacher might have explained it to me, but I remember that sentence being simple enough so I understood it. And I put in toy maker, and I think it was um maybe like post Christmas. So I think I was like on my high of like maybe I've gotten a toy, maybe like my parents got me like a toy figure or something. But I remember just like, oh man, that was a great present. Like I had a toy. And so I was really excited about it. And I said, you know what? I want to grow up to be a toy maker. Like I really want to make toys when I grow up. But I will say I had no idea what that meant, because at the time I was like, Santa brought toys, or
Yeah.
toys just showed up.
Or you want to be like an
Toys R
elf
Us.
at the North Pole or something.
Right. I didn't know what the process.
Yeah.
I didn't know what the process was,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember being teased about it by my classmates, because they're like, "There's no toy maker. Like, who makes toys? Like, that's not a job." And so I think kids are like, "Oh, toys just show up, right?" Because that's how you interact. Like, you either walk into a store and it's already there packaged, or it shows up under the Christmas trees, right? So, or as a gift. And so I just remember going like, toy maker, that's not a real job, because everybody else had written like, I want to be a teacher. And I remember like marine biologist being something very, very common and popular at the time, because everybody's thinking like marine biologist means like swim with dolphins. um and or of like a animal doctor, which a veterinarian. And so um I I was the only one who chose toy maker.
Yep.
And I would say, honestly, I forgot about that answer for many, many years later on, because again, kind of circling back to my own relative uh, relative skills in like math, that helped me get through school. It was like those are the like math classes was always like the classes that like helped me pass that grade.
Mhm.
And so I carried that like proficiency into middle school and high school. And then I was good at math and I was good at physics. And then and because of that, and I had no idea about what it meant to like choose a career. So I actually went to school after high school. I went into electrical engineering. So I actually have an engineering degree. I went to got a mechanical engineer degree. And then I decided I wanted to be a designer. So I went to art school again, and like I got a product design degree, and that's when I learned like there's this thing like called toy design, product design, furniture design, car design. I actually went for car design first, um,
Hmm.
but then and then I'm kind of fast forwarding because I want to come back to like
All good.
dream. It's
Yep.
like I did over a decade of corporate work in design, and none of those years like did the idea of toys pop up. But I always collected toys. I continue. You can see toys behind me, literally on my shelf. Um, and so like fast forward to this NFT thing, and suddenly I have this like character that I'm building, and part of that, like earlier last year, I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to do this, I have a cartoon character, and one of the things that I wanted to do is just have a toy, like a physical toy. And I realized like, oh shoot, like I had this dream that I had back in 89, and this is almost like what 32 years ago. Is
Mm.
that 30? They're doing my math right? Yeah, I'm saying like I'm good
Yeah.
at math and I can't do my 32
Yeah.
years
Don't ask
ago.
me, but that sounds good.
So 32 years ago I wrote like toy maker, and then end of last year I made a plush of my cartoon character. And I was very, very busy at the end of last year shipping it around to all over the world, to maybe 2 dozen countries. And now
So
like
cool.
as they're slowly arriving people's homes, people are sharing photos of babies and kids, like hugging them, and like it's just a wonderful feeling. But it's like it hits a different like level in my heart because I'm like, wow, like I wasn't chasing that dream of being a toy maker, but this is the happiest like fulfilled dream ever. You know, it's a little different from like, oh, I want to grow up to be an engineer, or like I had these ideas of like what I wanted to be when I was in high school. There were some ideas about like, even when I went to engineering school, I was like, oh, maybe I'll be an engineer. And when I went to design school, maybe I'll be this like, you know, famous like product designer. Maybe I'll work at Apple, maybe. And it's like, then you put in like over a decade of work in corporate, and then you just get back. I finally get back after all these years into something so simple. And then I realized that I'm just doing something that I wanted to do when I was in third grade.
How cool
It's
is
just
that?
crazy. Yeah, it took a long time, but like I'm so grateful for this opportunity. It's crazy.
It's absolutely beautiful. So I guess for everybody listening that isn't as familiar with your character and your project, I mean, that I knew that bringing up the toy would kind of like enter into kind of Max's world a little bit. Why don't you tell everybody about Max and the character? I mean, that character goes back for you. I think you said 2017 or something like that. Not here.
2003.
Oh, 3.
No, 2003.
All right, tell us about that.
Yeah. So, well, probably concurrent to like my whole love for cartoons and comics is like this love for cars. And I remember loving the car that my parents had back in Taiwan, and I cried when we had to sell it because we were moving. And it was this old, I don't even know what brand it was. I think it was a domestic brand, because at the time Taiwan had some factories that they made the domestic versions of, I think, imported Japanese car makers. I remember because that car was the only thing that we could take to go out of the city. Well, I wasn't even in the city. I was in like a city proper, but I was like in the countryside. But it was the only way we could get anywhere, because at the time there wasn't such like robust public transportation. So the car to me was in a very early age, like the sense of freedom to get out of the countryside, to go visit my relatives, to go into the city. And so I really missed being in the back seat and like looking at like the passing scenery. When I came to the States, I was like, wow, everybody got a car. Having a car back in Taiwan was like not an easy thing, but everybody has a car here, especially in Jersey. And you got these big wide highways and things like that. And so I grew up like really falling in love with cars. Cars have just been something that I really liked. I remember even in engineering school, this is when I didn't know about design. I went to engineering school because I thought I could work on cars. So I even took like vehicular dynamics, like meaning like I took a class on like how like the pitch and yaw and the acceleration, the stopping and like grip, things like that, just like theoretical basic stuff about vehicle dynamics. And then I realized, oh wait, I'm not really into the engineering part of it. I want to go into the design of it. So I went to San Francisco for art school, for design school, specifically for car design. And it was there that I picked up a secondhand, a used 1996 Mazda Miata. It's called the MX-5 anywhere else in the world, but it's Miata to me. And I was very lucky to be in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, where the weather is gorgeous and there's just like amazing roads. So anytime that I had trouble in school, or I had like pressures, or I was stressed, I would just hop into my Miata. It was a little beat up too, so I wasn't worried about scratching it or bumping it or anything like that. It was just like this amazing car that I was able to like drive out of the city, along the coast, and I drove everywhere with it. So it made me really fall in love with the feeling of driving, and like no other car has. And so like that feeling stayed with me. When I graduated school in San Francisco, I sold it to a good friend. I had moved overseas for an internship. When I came back to the States, I went right into corporate work. And so commute was like a thing for me. It was just mostly like train into the city, out of the city. And so like cars became utilitarian for that for me at that point. And then I got to a point where it's like maybe, so I was mid 30s, and I think I hit like maybe an early midlife crisis where I felt like my life was just very uneventful.
Mm-hmm.
It was corporate, and I was just putting, 12 hours a day, 14, 15 hours a day for work. Like from the moment I step out of the house to when I come back, it was like a span of like 13, 14 hours a day for work. And I'm like, I don't have anything else. I need an escape. So I started thinking about back to that Miata that I had in college. And I spent the next 3 years looking for it, for the perfect example of the exact same car. Eventually I found it. Long story short, it was like the best, car I ever bought. It was just as good as I remembered it back when I was in school. I bought an even better condition, low mileage. So it was just this thing that I felt like it felt really good because I was making my own money, and I was spending my money on something that was very important to me, and it was very, very fulfilling for me. And in 2017, I was still kind of in a rut. So I bought like the car in 2015, but in 2017, I was still in this like kind of creative rut. And I felt like I needed to channel that something. Like I needed to channel my creativity outside of work into something that was really, really, really mine. And I thought about the things that in my life that I felt like was inspirational, or at least had the potential to be creative. And the only thing I could think of was literally the car that was sitting in my driveway, which is the Miata. And so that was like the beginning, the seed of Max the Miata, my cartoon character. And it started with like basically 3-panel, square panel web comic. And it was just trying to say something funny or humorous about my ownership, my interaction with the car. But I wasn't in like I'm not a character in it. It's just literally Max, what I named the Miata, the car, and it was just like as if it had a life of its own. It had these big eyes because it had pop-up headlights, and it's just like very mundane kind of stuff, but with a little bit of humor. And again, I think maybe in the same way that I was drawing as an escape when I was a kid, I was again drawing Max the Miata as an escape from like the corporate slash adult life, right? And then that kind of just was there for like, I did that as much as I can. And then from 2017 to like end of 2020, when it really kind of just slowed down, I didn't really have any good ideas. And then at the beginning of 2021, I was like, you know what? I still feel really strongly about this character. And then I took like kind of a leap of faith, and I redesigned it into like this kind of creature instead of a car, this creature. And then I don't know if it was fate, but when I turned it into a creature, it started clicking with me creatively, because suddenly there's all this other stuff. It didn't have to be a car on the road. It didn't have to have like, references to car ownership. It didn't have to have car culture, like jokes or anything like that. It just became my own character. And it coincided with the introduction of VFriends. And then I merged those two together. So I literally took like my VFriends like enthusiasm, and I channeled it through Max, and I started doing NFTs. I started telling my story. People really, really vibed with Max, the character, which is funny because they vibe with Max the Miata, and Max the Miata was not looking like a car at the time. So it's just this animal creature thing with this like tail and this like weird shape, and like these, it was almost like a blue panda. If that's probably like the closest analogy I can think of it.
That's good.
And then it was just really me diving into like telling my story, and educating people as I was learning about the NFT space. And like, I've been very, very fortunate to be very early on in that space. And I cranked out a lot of like art in the first 2 months. And so I've been just kind of like riding on the coattails of that enthusiasm in the NFT space. So I'm very lucky to be that.
Yeah. I'd be curious to hear. Well, that'll be easy to remember. I want to come back to that kind of that even just the Web3 NFT space and stuff like that you've been working in. But I want to
Mhm.
go back a little bit. There's something that stood out to me, and I thought was particular to kind of the work theme of the show or whatever. So when you referenced that in the tweet, you referenced like, so there's ways people say this, and even as you told the story, you rephrased the question. And I was curious about the question. So I liked in the tweet, it said, what I want to do when I grow up. And then when you repeated it, you said, who do you want to be when you grow up? And then a lot of people use the phrase, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I've actually wondered about that question to children in a little way, because there's a bit of a identity issue wrapped up in
Mhm.
what we tend to mean in terms of career. And I always think it's kind of interesting the way we get those confused and wrapped up, and yet vocation, like your own story, you go, there was something in me calling all along, no matter how corporate I went. There was like a love for drawing, a love for toys, a love for cars, and these things. It's your story is incredibly beautiful because it's like Max is this culmination of all of these things that represent like safety and freedom and creativity, like the words you're using, saving grace, like that's it's just it's an incredibly beautiful story. I wanted to kind of circle back to that. I guess I didn't necessarily I guess the question there is like is around this identity and like, so because I want to hear your response to those versions of the question. So what do you want to do, who do you want to be, what do you want to be, and like, just I don't know if that if the language
Mhm.
lands differently, and just to hear your own thoughts about that kind of vocation and identity.
That's an interesting question because to be honest, like the reason I probably repeat it differently was because I don't really remember the exact semantics
Mhm.
of like what the original
Well,
question
that's what
was.
made it pop out
But I
too.
would, right. But it's interesting because I think at the time, even if the teacher asked me both questions, I
Mhm.
wouldn't necessarily know the difference because
Mhm.
again, the language barrier,
Mhm.
and I don't know if I was that self-aware when I
Mm.
was a kid, but to me, it will probably be interpreted as one in the same, just kind of like, well, who do you imagine your future be
Oh, no,
yourself,
no, no.
future
Right.
self?
I totally
Yeah, yeah,
understand that then. But like
right,
now I'm saying like I'm
right.
putting
So
that to you now.
right, right.
Yeah.
And so like what's interesting is I think at the time when I was in third grade, I think I wasn't even thinking about a job. Like
Mhm.
I think every other kid understood the context of that question was, what do you want that job to be? Right?
Mm.
This career, this thing that you're gonna do when you're an adult. Right? When I was a kid, I remember the context of my answer was I just wanted to create fun things for kids to play with. And I think if I'm really honest, if I answer that question now, that's honestly like the best thing about it. Like me creating Max plush
Mm.
isn't necessarily this thing I feel like, oh, like I can check that off my bucket list. Like
Right, right,
I
right.
designed a toy. It's when people post the pictures of like a baby girl like hugging Max and then like proceeding to like gnaw on his like leg. Like to me, that's beautiful. Like I'm
Yeah.
like, I can't believe that something I'm creating is part of somebody's childhood. In
Mm.
the same way that
Yeah.
Doraemon or Spider-Man and Ninja Turtle is part of my childhood,
Mm. So
right?
good.
And so coming back to that question, like, would I answer that differently? Who do I want to be? I want I want to be someone who can create things that make kids feel safe.
Mm.
And I don't mean like safe from harm, meaning the sense of safety that they feel in being confident about themselves,
Mm.
the safety that they can feel from loving themselves and like getting a sense of like who they are. Because I think that's what I like
Mm.
when I saw or read comics and I have like the piece of like, feeling like I'm again, yes, it's by myself in my own room, but the sense of safety of like diving into a comic book, like that feeling is what I want for like kids in my position to feel. Now, I'm not saying it's limited to kids who are necessarily bullied or isolated or can't make friends, but like that's a huge part of it. But if like if Max is somehow for a very, very young child, is like, that was my first memory of a fantasy character or a cartoon character or a comic character, and I have this affection towards him because I grew up with him, that's huge for me.
Yeah.
Like, you see Goofy behind me? There's a reason I chose Goofy as, like, not choose, like I have an affection for him. Is because when I was a kid in Taiwan, my grandpa had gone to Disneyland in Japan and brought me back a plush Goofy. And it was one of those things that first contact, that first exposure to that cartoon character, and because it was given to me from my grandpa, like that's all the context the kid needs. Like, it's came from grandpa who gave me this gift, and it was something I never seen before, and now I have an affection for it. That's literally how I think I love like Spider-Man and any other comic book superheroes, because I was like literally exposed to him first. Of the Ninja Turtles, Leonardo is my favorite because I was exposed to him first for whatever reason. Maybe I just picked Leonardo first out of the, at Toys R Us or something. That opportunity to be like, Max is the first character of some sort in some realm or some category for that person, actually gives me like not only appreciation, it actually gives me a sense of responsibility. Like, I gotta spend the rest of my life making sure that Max is a character of positivity, of encouragement, of strength, and like self-love and all those things. Because I'm like, my target like audience is, kids and their parents. And so I had to build this sense of like trust around this character so that like this thing becomes a source of positivity. Right.
So good.
And as for like, what was the other question? Who do I want to be?
I mean, you're answering it. Yeah. Cause it was just like the versions of the question I was bringing up, but we don't have to go through all of them, but it was like, so what do you want to do? Who do you want to be? And then, I mean, what do you want to be is like another turn of just who.
Right.
Yeah.
But okay, so what I just said was like answering the question, like, who do I want to be? Like, this is the kind of person I want. I want to be the creator who continues to spend the rest of my life, as far as long as possible, building out like the story around Max, and it continues to like be in different spaces and in different situations and contexts, so that kids can go like, oh, Max is like a good reminder to be positive, to love myself, to feel confident in myself and to love creativity and exploration of different avenues of self-expression and things like that. And then what I want to do is executing on that dream, right? In a way, like Gary Vee has inspired me to do, is like, okay, now it's not going to be just Max in the form of NFTs. It's going to be Max in the form of plush, maybe toys, maybe comic books, maybe cartoons, maybe video games and things like that. But like, even when I say those things, it's not about executing on a video game like a check mark, right? Just like I didn't execute on the plush as a check mark, even though it was a great thing to do, because like it's a childhood dream to make a toy. But the intention behind the plush is like, now I get to have Max go beyond the digital realm and become a physical thing that kids love and like and carry with them, right? Like one of the people who bought a Max plush from me, her son now like loves Max more than any of other plushes, and they just went on like a family road trip, and she was like, all right, you need to pick one of your 12 plushes, and he picked Max, the one that just made it right before like the family trip. And now he like hugs it like you, and she shared like very, very generously shared pictures of him sitting in like the child seat in the back of the car holding Max. And I'm like, that's amazing. Like, it's not just the making the plush, it's like now Max is part of the family photos, part of the family trip memories, part of growing up. Like that's what it is. So anything else that I do execute on, I I want to make sure like if I do a video game, then that video game links back to something that was inspiring for me as a kid, or I think is going to be inspiring for a kid. Whether if it's a storybook in the same way. So it's not going to be just do it to do it, but done in a way that it furthers or expands that story so that kids can absorb that intention in a way that makes sense to them.
I really love the way I hear, like, just thinking of the, you know, like how and why, and then what is kind of like, and then whatever, like whatever evolves, whatever, like
Right.
practically, like, oh, it's a toy, or it's like the what is a little like, that's details at some level, but how to present or why to engage, like it's such a, I mean, man, this is all just a really kind of beautiful story and journey. So I want to know, like, well, one, I think on the back of, on the heels of that, I'll ask you a question I try to ask every guest. And I feel like you almost spoke to it a little bit now, even if unwittingly. How would you define success?
Success to me would, and it's weird because like it's inevitably going to say like I think I'm successful now, but I really do feel like I'm enjoying success, and
Mm,
it's really just loving the opportunity to live each day and looking forward to each day to like do what you love to do. Like there's this, and this is like when I say this answer, it wasn't easy because I've had like tough personal stuff in the past, and I really didn't like really um kind of dive into my own personal well-being or my personal happiness until 2 years ago.
mm,
And so in the past 2 years, it has been a long journey of like finding myself and then like really, taking care to change my mindset about things, to really look at and dissect my personal relationships with people, my expectations of what my life is supposed to be, and shedding a lot of those preconceived notions of what success is, until I got to this point here now where I truly feel lucky to wake up every day to do what I love to do without the burden of I have to achieve something by a certain time.
mm,
I think that's like the ultimate freedom is I love doing what I love. I love doing what I love to do,
mm-hmm.
and I have no timeline and I have no goals, like hard goals for what that's supposed to be. And I'll expand on that a little bit. I would love for Max to be on the same level as Calvin Hobbes, as Garfield, as Mario, and in the video game realm, as as Bugs Bunny, Spider-Man, and all those things. Those are like ambitions.
Mm-hmm.
But I also am keenly aware that I may not be here next week.
Mm-hmm.
I may not be, right? So from now till the last day I have on earth, every single day is an opportunity for me to be kind to myself, be kind to other people, and then just appreciate that day I get to do something, right? But I don't have clear goals of like, oh, I have to have a video game out in 2023, or I have to have a movie out in 2030. Like
Right.
everything is just I and it's funny because now I have no goals. I have ambitions, but I don't have hard goals to achieve, and that ironically makes me super pumped and motivated to do those things,
Yep.
because now I'm like I'm not in a, like I don't have the urgency or the pressure to do it. I just feel very, very grateful that I have the opportunity to try.
Mm.
And like, that's to me success. And it's like, damn, like when I realized that maybe a year and a half ago, it just became like every day became this like reminder of I'm successful now.
Mm.
I'm successful now. I'm successful now. Ooh, I slipped a little bit. Today was a bad day. But you know what? I had a lot of success up until right now. And then like thinking back to myself, like if I die today, do you regret anything? And I'm able to say, no, I didn't. I don't regret anything because I got a chance to love what I do. That's amazing.
It
Like
is amazing
to me. And then it's just like, funny thing is like the feeling of that, as long as I keep reminding myself of that, it gets stronger and stronger every day. So I know that I was successful a year and a half ago, but the feeling of being successful now is much stronger than I felt a year and a half ago. I hope that makes sense.
It makes tons of sense. You've referenced the last few years, and like as you're kind of saying all this, it's just rich with clear wisdom. And I'm curious if there was something that happened a few years ago, like because just if if you were if this is new, right, in
Mm-hmm.
that time frame over the course of your life, and it as I'm listening, it sounds deep in terms of personal truth, but it sounds deep even if you were to say, if you took the roadmap of like the philosophical or the psychological or even the spiritual, like there's a depth of truth to what you're saying that is like that resembles, let's say, enlightened thinking. And I'm just curious, like, did you have some sort of a enlightening thing that happened that like what, like why that time frame? Like you're like, yeah, the
Mm-hmm.
last couple of years. And was there a catalyst?
Um, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't pinpoint to any specific one thing. Um, I will say that they were personal relationships.
Mm.
Growing up, um, I think I I would say that I had a tough childhood, not because I was at a lack for material things. So I think my parents provided plenty of material things, even though I previously mentioned I'm like, oh, I didn't have like the coolest
Sure.
shoes, the coolest clothes and things like that, but I had clothes
You had shoes
and
on.
we had
Yeah.
a comfortable,
Yeah.
we had a house, you know, and so, obviously I went to school.
Yep.
And so there are a lot of materials and financial things that I appreciate. But I think, and part of this is like the traditional kind of like Chinese upbringing is that there's no, I think what I lacked growing up was a lot of this um, guidance about how to find myself in a new world. Right. And I think um, I empathize a lot with kids just because I came back to the States when I was a kid. And I think that's a very different mindset when you're here for school in grad school or here for work, because when you're an adult, you have a certain like sense of yourself. You're like, okay, well, I've done this and I've gotten through this. And a lot of these responsibilities allow you to focus on things that are not like emotionally damaging to you because you have like real world like responsibilities that you need to address. I think for kids it's very different because kids, you're like, oh, I just went to school and I had friends, we played, and I have all these memories that I can make with the kids. And then like suddenly I'm shifted into this whole new world where I had no friends, I don't speak the language, I was being bullied all the time, physically as well. um, and and I think that's something that without proper parental guidance or understanding of what the kid is going through, I have to internalize a lot of those things. I had to figure out what that meant. Why do people tease me or bully me or beat me up in school? Why do people judge me for the way I look, or the way I speak, or the way I dress? Like that didn't make sense to me because those were very, very new to me. And I think in some ways it was um, in retrospect crippling in terms of my ability to identify what is a healthy relationship and what is not a healthy relationship, because I was so deep into my own like way of understanding the world. So if I saw something, I didn't have a soundboard to say that's okay or that's not okay. I'm just like, okay, well, is that a threat? Is that a threat to me? That felt like a threat. And I'm going to act out on it, or I'm going to internalize it and blame it on myself. Right. And so um, that, again, like I'm saying this with clarity, but not because I knew it at the time.
Right.
So in my 20s and my 30s, I was in relationships where I had like friction in my family, outside my family, in my social group, where these things bubble up. And I'm like, I don't know what happened. Right. I don't know why, just like I fell out of, you know, uh, fell out with a friend, or maybe perhaps like a romantic partner, or with my parents, or things like that. It was just, but it was like hyper focus on like, I need to have a good career, I need to have make good money,
Mm.
I need to have a house or like a nice apartment, I had to have a nice car. There was this like again this again like just like this very, I think, Chinese upbringing of like, you need to have a career, stable career,
Mhm.
you have to have like a stable, you know you need to do this and this, and like there's like milestones they have to hit, right? And so my mind was so focused on chasing these milestones that, ironically, the inability to process and validate and identify healthy or unhealthy relationships as a kid basically wasn't getting addressed when I was an adult.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until a few years ago when everything kind of just crumbled, and there was like
Mm.
not specific events that happened. It was just like this me being like in a very dark place
Yep. Okay.
where I became, it's okay for me to say, like, I became suicidal for a few years, and I just got into a, like, I didn't know what it was,
Mm.
right? It was zero passion for anything. It was zero love for anything.
Mhm.
And I couldn't get anyone in my life at the time to provide me even a tiny bit of positivity. There was no one in my life,
Hmm.
not a single person in my life that was providing me some semblance of even saying, Dave, you're doing okay. Like, not a single person that said, Dave, you're doing okay. And the only reason I didn't go through with anything was because there were people that I wanted to live for.
Mm. Mhm.
There were people in my life I wanted to live for. And I didn't want to say goodbye to those people. And but I'm very grateful for not doing that, because on the other side of that,
Mhm.
I realize how precious every single day is. Every single day, every single day. Um, and and I continue to like kind of remind myself of like, it's funny because I look back and I'm like, man, like that's crazy. Like when I was in it, it was like suffocating every day, suffocating every single day. I remember I remember going to work on a train, like, taking the train from Jersey to New York. It was like an hour train ride, get to Penn State. Like literally as I was like crossing Hudson River, the river that splits New York City and New Jersey, I felt like lifeless. I felt like there was like nothing to live for, like literally. And I just felt like I was walking into work like a dead person. And I would sit down. It's funny enough, I would sit down and work, and I'll be like literally 10 hours of emailing, which is so funny, which is like, why didn't I just do this from home? And then COVID hit, and I'm like, oh, just do this from home, right?
Mhm.
So, no, at the time I was already like not in the corporate world anymore. But like, and I think, I wouldn't wish that on anybody, like that, those dark periods. But I think those dark periods really, really gave me like clarity about what life is supposed to be, what I'm supposed to do. Because it's weird, because like when you get to that place, and if you can just like, I was very lucky to be able to get to the other side and just be like, and have the wherewithal to like imagine myself on my deathbed, or like, old and on my deathbed, and looking back and be like, would I have regretted that? Right? Would I have regretted missing out on a lifetime of spending, having good memories with those people? And I remember telling myself like, yes, I would regret it. I would regret it. And that was the only reason. That was the only reason I didn't go through with anything. And so um those memories are, obviously pretty fresh to me. Those are just, a few short years, even though that period lasted for, I don't even know, maybe 2000 to 2019, so like 4 or 5 years, so um but I appreciate being able to do it, because I didn't realize I was in it. I didn't, and it wasn't like a cliff drop. It's when you go into that mindset, it's like step by step into the water, right? It's like step by step into the depth, right?
Mhm.
It's not like a cliff drop. But it's funny. It's like, like, not funny, but like it's weird in that you don't recognize when you're stepping lower and lower and lower and lower. You don't even realize when you're drowning. You don't realize that you've been screaming for help and nobody cared, or nobody noticed. um and that's also another reason, like, now I keep my social circles very, very tight, because I'm very selective about who is a positive influence in my life. Because I think, and I think it's not because anybody had ill intentions against me. It's that it's this indifference, right?
Yeah.
It's this, I don't know what to do with it. I don't care enough to investigate. And then I fall into it, where I slip into it. Um, and yeah, and just very, very lucky to have kind of clawed my way back. Um, and again, just like I wasn't like a cliff, it wasn't a falling into this from a cliff. It was also not like a rocket ship up upwards.
Mhm.
It's step by step, up. um and I think, you know I think this is where I think my art is life saving for me,
Mhm.
because there's something about the stories that I've read, the the characters I connect with, that there's like this common theme of, what if you can imagine it? What if it is possible, right? I think there's just something like nice about reading superhero comics, or even like Sunday comic strips like Garfield, or like Calvin Hobbes. Like, they I think over the years they just like planted this little seed, like, it's possible, it's funny, you can have some humor, you can laugh about something, you can enjoy something, like, just like, it's not some like life story. It's just, when I was in like the low point, I was still able to laugh about things. I was still able to see, but what if tomorrow's a little better? What if I allowed myself to take a chance on this? Right. And so, and not judge myself, and not to, like, even like the idea of like Calvin, for example, never listening to his parents, right? I stopped listening to my parents, right? I stopped living by other people's expectations. I stopped allowing myself to be dictated by that, right? So it's weird, because it's like I don't want to shift blame on people, even though I did at the time.
Sure, of course.
But coming out of this is like, oh, I do need to take some accountability, like, because like I could also say that I allowed those words to seep into me, right? I allowed those negativity to dictate my life, but it is hard, right? So like I think this is where like Max is really important to me, because like I empathize with people who can't hear that part. Yes, you need to take accountability, but then like that's really hard, because when people ignore you, or when people are indifferent to you, or the people you love are indifferent to you, and you have no sense of support, it's very, very hard to grab that branch called accountability. But you do need to do that eventually. But you still need that little glimmer of light or hope in that dark space that allows you to go like, okay, what if I just put some distance between myself and that negativity? What if I put some distance between me and those voices, those expectations? If I just put some distance, then at least you can use your remaining strength to grab onto that branch called accountability, self-care, self-love, and all those things, right? And so like I hope, not that I hope anybody, wish anybody to get to that place in their lives, but like I hope to be that glimmer of, of happiness and cheerfulness and optimism and curiosity. Like this I do think curiosity is really important. Like when I was in a low point, I don't know what the motivation was to start Max the Miata comic. It was just like, I don't know what to do. I was so anxious about life. I was so anxious to step home, go to work. I was just filled with anxiety 24 hours a day. I wasn't sleeping. I was sleeping maybe 2-3 hours a night for months. And I just felt like nothing was working. Not like I wasn't living a life that I was happy with. And I think it was a mixture of a tiny bit of optimism, a tiny bit of curiosity, a tiny bit of just I don't know, like leveraging that, like, I don't want to regret anything. I want to live for certain people. Those three things combined, I would say, was probably the impetus for like this. Why don't you just open the computer? Why don't you open up Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator? Why don't you just draw your Miata as a comic character? And once I started doing that, I was just spending all my free time doing that. Like once I started drawing Max the Miata, I was literally drawing, because I couldn't sleep anyway. So I was just drawing Max the Miata web comics until like 3-4 o'clock in the morning, until I was so tired I would just fall asleep on the couch. Until I had to go to work. So
thank you so much for sharing all of that. And David, you're doing more than okay. It's such, I mean, thank you. And then I have a question about this. So throughout this entire conversation, and I feel like that curiosity piece really and the experience of anxiety, and then the kind of like important role of curiosity in the beginning of Max, there's something that stands out to me. And so I'll just let's see. I have always thought that anxiety and excitement are like two different sides of the same coin. And I'll give you what I mean there is like, I'm excited to go on this trip because I have positive emotion about this adventure I'm about to go on. So I'm really excited.
Mhm.
I'm excited for VCon or whatever, right? I'm excited about that. But let's say like I'm I have anxiety about like a social interaction there or something like that, right? There, but it's like it's almost like adrenaline, like something's like coursing in me, right? And then I go, well, as you were talking earlier, and I forget exactly what, but like your story had a like, I found myself in a new world. I found myself in a new world. I found myself in a new world. And you actually said at one point, like how to find yourself in a new world, like I had to figure out how to find myself in a new world. And I actually went, that happening enough times, I think made you like a super explorer. Like you have an exploratory wonder that is like, I'm free. So like, I don't have goals for the coming year. I have, but I have, and then coupling that, but I have I'm accountable to some stuff, but it isn't like, here's the check marks of goals. So you tracking with all this? So like, I'm like,
Yep. Yep.
so I've always thought awe and wonder, let's say, are the opposite of like terror, in the same way that anxiety and excitement are like micro versions of that, right? So anxiety kind of as it gets huge is terror, right? And then let's say excitement as it gets huge is like awe, like almost like what
Right.
people use like religious language, like it's
Mhm.
wonderful or full of awe or awesome. um
Right.
there's a very exploratory like ethos to your story. And as you just said, like I was in this place of anxiety, and I said like, and then you're like curiosity was really important, and I was like, that's the thing I've been hearing like at some level. And I'm just curious, like, well, one, I just respond to that a little bit, just like as like as a laying out of that. But then like I actually do think there is something about, and I'll just make a statement here, like about you're like, everyone else had a roadmap for me. I had to hit these benchmarks, these expectations, which like in like 12-step circles, they'll say like expectations are resentment under construction or something like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Premeditated resentment. That's what expectations are in your
Right.
relationship. Like, okay, cool.
Yeah.
And it's true, right? And so you're like, and similar, I hear that with like, yeah, I don't have like a bunch of goals laid out. um I'm on a journey, and I'm exploring the territory. I'm going into the unknown almost perpetually. And even your characters like, or characters are exploring,
Mhm.
I kept thinking of Max uh as submarine lighting the seafloor for what's the cat's, it's a cat, right?
Oh, so yeah, yeah. It was a cool cat. It was like a cool cat derivative.
Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
like exploring. And so there's like this exploratory nature, and I go, and that
Mhm.
curiosity is important. I just wonder if there isn't something there about my anxiety turned adventurous, like.
I would say yes. I think I get what you're saying. I think I don't think I chose curiosity to be one of my personality traits. I think a big part of it is circumstantial, meaning the moving
Mhm.
from literally across the world, from one culture to another culture, which are in many ways diametrically opposed.
Yeah.
um, I think curiosity was a survival tool,
Mhm.
which as a creator slash artist slash cartoon comic car enthusiast, curiosity evolved into this thing that I was able to leverage as an advantage, a creative advantage. I would say also that curiosity in my, kind of young adulthood was a countering agent, like a balancing thing to those earlier
Mm.
expectations, right? So for example, this idea that I needed to have a dependable career, which is at the time either like a doctor or engineer or something else, like one of those big, you know, convention. I wouldn't say conventional, but like, you know, one of those top three things that like parents always say. And so my curiosity was the thing that fueled me to like kind of push back and go like, but what if it's not engineering? What if I can make something of design, no matter how much you think design is not a career, right? What if I do go across the country to San Francisco from New Jersey? What if I do change my major halfway through school? And so it's really interesting because curiosity, what is curiosity to me seemed as recklessness to my parents.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? What is curiosity to me was betraying the amount of investment that I've already made in terms of time and money and energy, right? Like, why would you be curious about something else if you've already done this? You've already spent the time and the energy and the money to do this, right? But you know what? If I didn't satiate that curiosity, it's funny. It's like, it seems overstating it, but I really feel this way at the time is I would die. I would just feel like I would die. And that's funny because Gary Vee says this about being an entrepreneur, right?
Yep.
Gary Vee says, like, if I'm not an entrepreneur, like I would die. If I couldn't be an entrepreneur, I would die. And I remember when I first heard it, I was really surprised when he said that term, but I'm like, that is totally what it feels like. If I didn't leave behind a career in engineering and try design school, I would feel like I would just die. If I didn't leave behind this major to switch to another major, I feel like I would die. If I didn't take on that internship in Shanghai after I graduated, I would die. But there were many, many voices in my life at the time, at all these different points in my life, who said, that's a bad idea. That's awful. Don't do it. You're throwing away this. You're throwing this opportunity away. Why don't you finish? Because I had enough. Well, I'll say this just to add a little bit of more context. When I went to design school, I carried a lot of credits over. And so I was able to graduate early. But that didn't mean I finished the curriculum. That just means I had enough credits to finish, to graduate. On the technicality, I was able to graduate. But I applied for an overseas internship. And I felt so strongly about taking on that internship that I'm like, okay, I will now forego the rest of this semester, which would allow me to perfect my portfolio, get more skills, and like do all that. I just want to graduate so I can go and get that internship and just move out of the country. So for a lot of people in my life, I was like, are you crazy? You already spent 3 years there. Why would you give it up now? Like, you're so close to finishing. And I'm like, I can't even concentrate on the rest of the semester because I'm so thinking, I so strongly believe in this opportunity. And then I went, and then I got sick, and I came back in 6 months. And then a lot of those same voices said, I told you so.
Yeah.
I told you so.
Yeah.
And that was a gut punch, right? And so, but I couldn't help it. Like, I had, fast forward a few years, in 2013, I had the opportunity to work overseas again for a big company. And I'm like, I got to do it. I got to do it. I have to put everything down, and I got to do it, because if I don't do it, I would regret it. It was probably the hardest few years of my life, because I basically, like, what started as like a 2-week, trip to kind of like see how it feels. And I thought I would come back to the States to just kind of pack things up and then move. The projects overseas was so urgent that I ended up staying there for 3 years. So I packed for 2 weeks, stayed for 3 years.
Awesome.
And then it was one of the toughest times, like in terms of just workload and like being alone in a new country. But going back to what you're saying, I actually really agree with you about like anxiety and excitement being flip sides of the coin, because I'm like, I am very excited about these things that are pivotal in my, like these, I wouldn't say pivotal moments, pivotal opportunities that come to me in my life.
Yeah.
And it's always super strong excitement and super strong anxiety, because I'm like, this could all go to shit, like this could really go badly for me. And I always remember the voices that said, told you so. And I'm like, what if this doesn't work out? What if this doesn't work out? What if this doesn't work out? The only thing that powered me through those decisions, just be like, just do it, is curiosity. Because I'm like, I can't live with myself if I don't know what's on the other side of that thing. I can't. I just don't know how to operate that way. So I always go to the other thing and I go do it. Sometimes, like, I feel like it's killing me, but like I did it and I'm like, oh my God, like this is so hard. This is so much harder. The responsibility is so much bigger. The circumstances are so much harder than I expected. But I always look back. I also remind myself, even in the beginning of those 3 years, I'm like, no matter how hard those 3 years are going to be, I know at the end of those 3 years, I'm going to look back on those 3 years and say, I'm glad I did it. So in the beginning of those 3 years, I'm already projecting what I'm going to feel at the end of those 3 years. And that mindset is what helps me get through those 3 years, because I'm always thinking like, regret kills. Regret is going to be the worst. Like regret is so much stronger than whatever hardship I'm going through right now. And so that's really like, I couldn't agree with you more. Like, and I feel it very, very strongly. And then like in the very memorable moments in my life, I have faced that choice of, do I make this choice even though the anxiety is through the roof, but I also know the excitement is through the roof.
Well, sometimes that kind of anxiety is an indicator of almost faithfulness to that thing that's calling you. So like, as you're talking, it's interesting because, so a thing calling you, that actually is like vocation. It means, like, we use calling, it means voice, like a voice is calling you, or there's something calling. And the story of your following curiosity is like it resembles, so artists use the idea of a muse. I know like Socrates had this like idea of like a daemon, but like this thing that would say something like conscience basically, but like, don't leave Athens. He'd be like, I'm not leaving Athens. Like it would tell him what to do. And then a muse is this idea artists use, right, of something outside of yourself. And then the whole concept of vocation is something is calling me. And all of those, that exploratory journey is like something is calling me. And if I don't follow it, I'm going to die. And I actually think that's a really right way to pursue a life of calling, and actually is at some level at the heart of what I hope to tease out in this podcast in general with everyone I talk to, is like, what is what is work, and what is our relationship with work? Is it something is it employment, or is it more than that? Is there something deeper or more profound? And I think your story really well illustrates the deep, more profound, life-giving nature of vocation. And and the work you're doing is like so deep, even in your own history, like the toys, the cartoons, that like giving yourself the freedom to just do what you love and go, yeah, I just want to make things. I want to create things I want to create fun things. Right. Which is, I think, what you said earlier. It's like, yeah. And it's so, it's like, okay, that's so simple. And yet it's so profoundly deep, at least in my hearing of it. Now, I also know we have like a certain amount of time, and I do want to like ask you to kind of share like in specific ways, like, you know, as I've been kind of getting to know you and following your work, which is really just through mutual kind of engagement in the V Friends community and all these things
Mhm.
that are popping up there. And you've been kind of like building and I actually, one, I just be like, you're good at this. Two, you're very helpful. And it's been cool to watch you just be an educator in a lot of ways too. Like, I'm figuring out co-ops and I'm figuring out NFTs and I'm figuring out like a ledger wallet and I'm figuring out and like explaining these things. Now, for those people listening, there's probably a large number of people that are just like, I don't know what anything you're talking about is in terms of like Web3. This doesn't need to be a class in that, although you are a good educator. And I imagine there's some concise versions that you can kind of do, but I would love to just go, hey, like with the time we have left, I'd love for you to be like, look, here's things specifically that I've been working on, places you can follow me or find me or engage with me or any kind of ask for the audience, but just like to kind of pivot us into like some concrete, like, here's what I'm actively working on and like kind of point people to where they could find those things or see those things. And
Yeah. I'm most active on Instagram. My handle is Max the Miata, Max dot Miata. I have my own Discord channel. I'm on Twitter, and I'm obviously the most active on Instagram because that's where Max started. I jumped, as I said earlier in this session, I jumped into NFTs with Max along for the ride, and I have been very, very lucky to kind of enjoy the coattails of the success of V Friends. And as I'm learning, I share that information because I'm like, well, that's the best way to document my own journey and help other people while it's fresh. Like, to me, I don't have the best memory. Like, even though I talked a lot about my like childhood and
rote
stuff like that,
memory.
like a lot of it is like feelings and kind of like
Yeah.
moments. But I'm very bad at remembering specific things. Like, if you gave me
Me
20
too.
steps, I'm not going to remember 20 steps. I'm going to remember two. Right. So for me, it's very, very important for me to like document it because it's the freshest when I complete something and I share those lessons. And I think, well, that's I think a lot of the people in my community vibe with me because I do share that. So I do something, I try something, I tell people, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm going to try, and these are the lessons that I learned. And a lot of people follow me precisely because of the lessons that I share at the end. And I think because a lot of them are either creators or they want to be creators. And I think my lessons, when I share them, I can distill it into kind of like um, these layman terms so that they're like, oh, okay, that's what it means. And I use analogies or I use like real world kind of like examples and things like that. And so like I feel like that's the value that I bring to my community is understanding NFTs in a simple way, but I don't deep dive into NFTs. So I don't think I run the risk of like saying anything or sharing anything that goes over the heads of too many people.
Mm.
Again, the reason I do this is um, because probably like, again, like you, we went through Web 1.0 and 2.0, and now that we're at 3.0, I'm like, oh man, I remember the days of AOL and like
Right.
instant messenger and like not understanding what the heck an email is or what any of those like um, best practices are. And so for me, I constantly just try to put myself in a position of like, if I am doing this as someone who has never done this before, what would I want to learn?
Mm.
What would I want to hear? And so this I'm saying all this is because this actually impacts how I am doing my rollout of projects and things like that with Max. In the first 4 months, so from May to September, I released a lot of NFTs. It was about me trying things, experimenting with things, sharing that knowledge. So a lot of people, and I'm very, I appreciate very much people supporting my work by buying my work. And I felt like, okay, it was a lot of value because it was worth it, hopefully, to them, because I was delivering educational value. But it got to a point where I'm like, in September, I'm thinking, well, I don't know if I could justify selling my art for this continued thing, because I felt like I needed to do more. So in mid-September, I stopped minting new NFTs. I just stopped completely, and I haven't minted new NFTs since then. Was because I wanted to dive into learning more, sharing more, educating more, and that's when I really dove into POAPs. And then that was at the same time a way for people to collect, you know, my work and my artwork and support me by engaging with me without actually spending any money. They just literally had to spend time following me and engaging with me. And so I've been experimenting with POAPs a lot. And then, and one of the things that I did at the end of the year is like this POAP game that I called Build a Max. So if you collected a certain number of POAPs from the game, from 5 rounds of the game, I will create a customized, manually generated NFT basically for people who collect a certain amount of POAPs. So that's something I'm going to do over the next month, is literally create manually 78 or maybe even 79 NFTs for each person. So instead of like the algorithmically generated NFTs that are common, I'm manually generating those things depending on what people collect. Then I put those.
So that will be
together.
built. It will be created out of the themes
POAPs.
that they collected.
Right, and so for me, it's like I'm learning at the same time I'm being strategic.
So good.
Right, because when you buy, for example, an algorithmically generated NFT project, when you buy, you're not interacting with anything. You're just basically, it's a lottery draw, so you get it, right? But by doing this POAP game where you have to be here to claim a particular POAP in each round, you're basically building your own version of like a Voltron, like your own, like that's my analogy. Like you're building your 5 lions and you're picking your colors and your combinations and your characters. And then I then spend literally the time to put the ones that you pick together. Luckily, no combination has been repeated. And so every single person will be getting like a 1-of-1 NFT. So for me, it's me learning what's possible for free, me learning how to organize and sort through all this information and data and how to engage with my community, how to build a community through a fun way. But then also, I am strategically leveraging everybody's interaction to build out the world. Because think about the alternative, which is I draw one thing, release it as an NFT, somebody buys it. I release another NFT, somebody buys it. There's a very slow, so comparatively, the way I'm doing it, even though it sounds very like intensive and slow, it's actually a faster way to build out the world, because I can create this thing where everybody pulls together the POAPs. I'm like, oh, people really vibe with this POAP, this character, this thing. And then I'm like, oh, shoot, like I'm actually engaging the community to build the world of Max rather than me drawing one NFT at a time and, you know, crossing my fingers, something vibes. So this is really, you know, a strategic move on my part. I'm actually going to talk with someone, and I want to spill the beans yet because it's like a little too early, but I am talking with somebody who has a particular set of skills that I don't have. And so like, that's what I'm doing. I'm like dipping my toes into realms that I am not good at. And I think this is a good time for me, not only because it's a new year, but because so far, everything that I've done with Max is within my personal set of skills. And for me to now extend the building of this world into other realms of, you know, entertainment or products, and having to rely on the skill of someone else is new for me. But again, this theme of curiosity, I'm like, if I don't do it, if I don't take this step, I can't do it because I don't have the skill sets for it. And I'm also curious as to like, can I find people who are skillful enough or have the particular skills to manifest those ideas that I have for Max, right? So it's a leap of faith for me. It's a new challenge for me. It's exciting and anxiety inducing for me. But you know, I again, like I don't feel like I can do it any other way, right? And it's just kind of like what we talked about, whether it's a muse or like an instinct or an inner voice, whatever it is, it just feels like, okay, this is the right time to do it. It's either now, not now or never, but like it's either now or you regret not doing it earlier,
Right,
right?
right,
Like
right.
that's basically the consistent theme. It's either you do it now or you regret not having done it
That's
later,
familiar. Yeah.
right? So that's what I'm doing. I'm just continuing to be patient and have zero expectations of how these things go. But like I'm much more curious and much more willing to kind of just, you know, maybe knock on somebody's door. And by that, I mean like DM someone who's got like this really interesting like knowledge. And I'm like, that's really interesting. I wonder if that could fit into Max's world. And then I
Mhm.
talk to them and they say like they're interested or not interested. um in the new year I would also like to incorporate photography. I do car photography on the side, not as a job, not as a gig, but like just as a side hobby.
Mhm.
But I've also learned to like not underestimate side hobbies, because Max the Miata obviously was a side hobby for many years. um so I would like to incorporate photography into my work somehow.
Mhm.
I would like to push new ideas about how to engage with my community more in my NFT. So that's like my big, if there was like an overarching theme, it's, and I don't know if this is looking too far ahead in the NFT space because we're all so early in this
Yep.
NFT space, but I'm actually actively trying to look beyond me simply drawing something and minting it as an NFT for someone to buy.
Mhm.
Because in many ways, I feel like I'm beyond that. Not because I'm too good for it, but like, and I understand anybody who wants to do that, like I would cheer them on. It's just like for me, my curiosity is not, can I draw something else and mint it as an NFT? My curiosity is, how can I build Max in a way that involves my community,
Yeah.
or it involves someone else with this particular skill set that I do not have, that could help me leapfrog and push this faster and quicker and in more ways that I can imagine. So like that's really exciting for me. That's my goal for 2022.
That is really exciting. And it is like it is consistent with that exploratory thing, right? But it's like it's as if you're honoring something emergent. Like this thing is actually I mean, even so the Build a Max, you said there's like 78, 79 of them. And so those are like
Hmm.
79 characters then that
Well,
are
there's
then
79 different combinations of like 5 sets of 5,
okay. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
there are
yeah.
5 rounds, 5 elements you can collect from each round. So there's 625 possible combinations.
Got it.
And those 78 to 79 combinations just happen to not overlap, which is great because I couldn't guarantee that nobody was going to have the
Sure.
same exact combination. But it just so happens they're none of them are the same combinations.
So good.
Um, yeah,
Well,
but it's fun. Yeah.
and even just like the like fanning the flame of the communal. I mean, it is at like an ethic level. It's beautiful. It's like, yeah, I can do that. Like, yeah, I can draw and I can like we figured that out already, right? So I can make a great career out of doing that, or I can go deeper, further, and go, what else might emerge here? Um,
Right.
Man, it's been an incredible process to watch. I actually have been curious myself, like even watching some of this, the irritating thing to me in all of this is my lack of time to pay attention to all the things that are going on at all the times that they're going on. It's just like, it just is what it is, right? Like it's
Hmm.
trying to, there's drops happening, this is happening, tasks, game, and the game idea of this was I think is really really cool. What in the using, I don't know, is there anything particular about POAPs that, I mean, just I've collected them. I have
Hmm.
not done, I have thought about uh creating some for some event or some task. Any like quick lessons on just that, on just like the platform itself and what you've like, how it's been for you?
I would say, you're saying like advice or tips for it?
Yeah, like if someone wanted to like interact with it, use it, make something, even like I mean, it's free, is my understanding, is that right?
Yes, it's free. So I see it as basically digital stickers, right?
Mhm.
And so I often ask myself when I'm creating a POAP, if I were to give someone a physical sticker for free,
It's good.
and you're like, say, you imagine like you're at like a Comic Con, and or like some kind of like public setting where you can buy from a bunch of different people, and everybody's giving you free stickers, right? You basically creating a POAP is creating a digital sticker for someone.
Mhm.
The key question that I think a lot of people don't ask themselves as creators, the creators don't ask themselves enough, is why should someone keep your free sticker? So if you gave somebody who has no context of who you are, what you do, what brand you are, and you just give them a sticker, the last thing that they want is a sticker of your logo, right?
Mhm.
Because you're like, oh, I don't know what this logo is.
Mhm.
Imagine that they're going to take the sticker and put it on the back of their laptop or on their bike or whatever.
Mhm.
So for me, it's always like, is my POAP collectible?
Mm.
So what I really learned when I first started POAP, I'm like, oh, I'm putting like Max the Miata on it, like my handle, like at
Yeah.
Max the Miata. And then I realized it was just too much self promotion.
Mm.
And so by the time I got into the POAP game where people was collecting, I'm like, I'm just thinking, I want every single POAP that I create to be as meaningful and fun, and like, even if nobody knows where they come from, if somebody sees it, like, who made this? You can click on it and figure out who it is, but I don't want you to know what it is, who did it, by looking at it. So I don't put my logo. I didn't put my logo in any of the POAP games, and I just want people to like love it. And so what happened was people who collected them were really proud of it, and they started sharing on Twitter. And like, this is the best one. This is the coolest thing, and it's by Max the Miata. And I'm like,
Mm.
that's the key, right?
Mm.
And I think too many creators are like, yeah, I have a brand, I have a company now. Here's a POAP if you just claim it, and they are kind of trading on this like hype about
Yeah.
POAPs, which is fine, which is great, but I don't feel like it creates long-term loyalty because there's no context for it. So if I create a POAP and it's like a random graphic, but I don't know what the graphic means,
Right.
but there's one big logo in the middle, to me, you're not helping yourself. So for that's my tip for somebody who's
Really
who's
good.
thinking about POAP, is like, create something that people really love. And so a lot of all of my POAP game ones were like basically cartoon characters. It's almost like you collect and you're like, oh, the first time I've ever seen a Bugs Bunny. I don't know what a Bugs Bunny is, but like, that's cool. So I created POAPs that just aesthetically, I think people would want to collect. That's my basically gauge. So for my next POAP, which is going to celebrate the 5th anniversary, again, I'm gonna create something that people like are gonna like, oh man, that's cool, like that's fun, and then the question is like, who did that? That's how I approach it. So
It's so good. Well, look, I know we're coming up on time. I just really appreciate you, all the work that you're doing, and then especially appreciate you
thank you.
taking the time to talk to me, and share your story here. I mean, this has been really good. Is there any final ask for people or anything like that?
Um, well, if since we're in like the NFT space, I would say I would encourage any creators out there, or even like people who are not necessarily don't see themselves as creators, but they've at least had a creative period in their life, is take a bit of leap of faith on yourself.
Hmm.
because if you take a chance to just create something that you might like, that you might be proud of, that makes you happy, even if it's for 15 minutes a day, um, do it, you know? Go through the process of learning NFTs. I think the great thing about NFTs is less about the technology. The technology is the breakthrough. But like I would almost encourage people who don't know about NFTs, like don't focus too much on the technology. The technology is there and it's constantly evolving. See this as from a macro perspective of this is opening up your creativity to be enjoyed by someone out there around the world.
Yeah.
That's the crazy thing. And that you could financially benefit from it is secondary. But if you can lean into your creativity and express yourself and take this opportunity, I think, again, like this is just something that I take to heart for myself and I remind myself is if you don't do it now, you're going to regret likely that you didn't do it earlier.
So
it's not now or never.
I will take that. That's good. Like that's good for me. So if anyone else listening, if it's not for them, I'm like, no, that's really good, especially as a lifelong doodler and drawer. And you're right. Everything you're just putting it off. You're just putting off those inevitabilities. But even just give yourself that window to do something, to try something, to learn and to be creative. It's like such a good word. And you've been a great model of it to be imitated, right?
Thank you.
So it's like, let's just try to be like David, be like Max, and we'll see where that can go, man. But I'm gonna let you go. I know you got another meeting to jump on. Thank you so much for taking this time.
Thank you, John.
All right, man.
Thank you.